Mark Ferrer, welcome back to Built to Sell Radio.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been an instant journey since last time you and I chatted.
Well, you flipped me a text which said something to the effect of, "I've been at it for a couple of years now and learned a lot. We should talk,"
totally.
which was the impetus behind our conversation. So for folks, I'll link up to our first episodes together in the show notes. But in summary, you had a tremendous exit from a marketing company, went on to kind of lead a major part of that business that acquired you for a period of time. And then you started buying businesses. Walk through the initial thesis that you had when you started N Capital.
Yeah. And so let me go back first.
Sure.
The business that I owned was a marketing services customer acquisition business. And the way I look at it is, for years, people paid me or hired us and our team. It wasn't just me. Let's be super clear, to create value in their brand or their business. And so that's where we were focused on for years and years and years. And then I decided it was time to sell our marketing business for a bunch of reasons, a bunch of personal reasons, a bunch of, timing business reasons. And we actually ended up selling to a private equity firm. And I was lucky enough, it was a Canadian private equity firm at the time, Onyx. And the reality is I was super naive and super humble. There were some people on the deal side that I knew from history. And so when I sold the business, we sold it in a pretty traditional private equity model. We got a bunch of money up front and then we had to earn out the other amount of money over time. And then I went to work for them. And through not just myself, but the business acquired about 7 businesses in about 3 years in different parts of the world, from Europe to US primarily. And so I saw the deals from the other side. And then I was trying to figure out, once that came to an end, which all private equity comes to an end at a certain point. And one or two things stuck out for me. One was, in a service-based business, when you're trying to put levers on the business to increase the value, one of the big ones is value capture, as you know, right? Which is, what are the costs we can take out? What are the efficiencies we can take out? And I remember sitting in meetings thinking like, well, people are our costs, but people are also the revenue. Right. So I remember sitting trying to figure this out. I'm like, I'm not that smart a guy, but if we take 30% of the people out, how are we not going to have some massive hit on the revenue? And so that was sort of my first, call it eureka moment of, hey, service-based businesses operate a bit differently. Right. That was the first one. And then the second one I thought was that, why are we spending so much time on trying to take costs out of the system when people had paid me for decades to build value in the system? And really, that was the impetus of trying to start, for lack of a better term, a private investment company, which was, how can we look at service-based businesses, specifically, not exclusively in Canada, because we're passionate still Canadians, and how do we look at them in, I would say, sort of messy sectors that hadn't been overcapitalized. In other words, for, I guess, a while, stuff like HVAC had been bought and pest control had been bought, and a bunch of amazing roll-ups by a bunch of great companies, but we weren't experts in those. So we tried to stay out of those. And our whole premise was, well, what if we try to look at it a little bit differently and focus all of our time, energy, and capital on creating value like people paid me for decades? And so my partners and ourselves, I joke and say I used to be in marketing. We probably started one of the worst names for a private investment company ever, called And Capital.
Which is ampersand capital, right?
Yeah, I would say And Capital, but it was the premise of, could we find people that we could connect with and assume you can get to a fair value of your business, but we could spend all of our time focusing on capital second. In other words, how do we make the business better? What do we need to invest in the business? How do we need to grow, as I call it, the 3 C's, the company, the culture, and the customers? And that's really how we did it. And I wish I could tell you it was a better roadmap than that, but it kind of took 25 years of building brands and businesses and people paying us on the outside to do it. And we just decided to take all that time, energy, and resource and put it into some of these businesses with like-minded founders.
And so that's super helpful. So again, the private equity model, and we've had people like Adam Coffey on the show before, where it's like, you go in, you get rid of some operational, dead weight, make some efficiencies, which often means getting rid of some people, and maybe latch it onto a couple of other businesses so that there's some, a bigger company to sell downstream and flip it 5-7 years later. Your value proposition, or your kind of thesis, is no, let's keep the people in place, but let's use innovative marketing techniques and leadership and so forth to grow the pie as opposed to cut down the pie. Am I getting that right? Generally?
Yeah, I think it has two or three components to it, right? What you said was true. We want to find a marketplace that we think we understand how to add value or creative value to the macro marketplace. So we happen to be in safety, which is not my background at all. We happen to be partners with some amazing founders who've been in safety for a long period of time. But safety, as an example, is hyper fragmented. So typically a founder would have a business between $2 and $3 million in revenue. They would have a region or they would have a service. And they were great at it and execute it, but it was hard to scale that business because they didn't have multi-services and they didn't have scale across the region.
Hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time. Whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now, knowing how the movie ends, I think puts you in the catbird seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So it's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. Explain what you mean by safety, Mark, just for folks who maybe
don't understand. It's a great question. It's a great question. So in Ontario and in Canada, a bunch of safety is regulated. And so that regulation creates an opportunity for training businesses. So we own 3 training businesses that we put together. And then from training, what it actually leads to is when you have a job site, either in infrastructure or construction or commercial, typically if you're building or reconstructing, you need safety officers on job sites to make sure that not only the people are safe and get home safe every day, but they're compliant with Ministry of Labor. So we have a workforce business that does staffing for safety. If you had a big project, we could staff them on a long-term, short-term, or mid-term basis. We have what we call a site solutions business, which think of it as consulting, which is if you have a building and people in the building, they interact with innate objects every day, you need to make sure that they're compliant, that there's gaps analysis. If something does happen, you need WSIB claims management. And then the last business we own, and really all of these are one integrated business now, is a rescue business, which is, I always say, high angle, which is something high in the air, or confined space, which is something deep in a hole. Either one requires safety in case somebody gets hurt. And so what we've done is the value creation we saw was we looked at the marketplace and said, like what happened in marketing and accounting and other professional services, there was really no integrated solution that said, if you were a customer, who do you call to get all 4 of those services at a high quality with the data you need and performance-based metrics and all those types of things. And so that's really what we did. That was the first big trend that we saw was how do we go from a service-based, hyper-fragmented marketplace to an integrated solutions marketplace. And that's been really our last 2 years of the acquisitions we've made.
Got it. And that company is Safety Co. Am I getting that right?
Yep. It's Safety Co. And interesting, the Safety Co. once again may not be one of our best brandings ever, but it was founder led, right? When we went and talked to all these founders, they said the same thing to us over and over and over. And because our model was so value creation, it was a very open dialogue with us with founders, even as we were trying to understand the market before we got into it. And they would say the same thing, which was, hey, look, this isn't a new idea, but if we could all work together in a better collective, and then we could find ways to collaborate better, that the marketplace would be better. And so after they said enough of these C words to me, we said, well, listen, originally we were going to call it Safety Collective, which was a collective of founders and a collective of services, but that's how we got to Safety Co. And that's still today. We brought the whole company together in December and we had a founder forum. And to this day, they're still saying that's the right story and the right objective. And they've probably been saying it for 20 years. We just got a bit fortunate on timing to be able to put all the pieces together, I think, John.
What was that founder forum like? Because let me just talk straight. I mean, when I think of the founders I know of $2, $3, $4 million businesses, oftentimes they are lone wolves, right? They march to the beat of their own drum. They are not nice, players in the sandbox generally. It's not to say they're not nice people or that they're not good to have a beer with, but they're kind of wild spirits, and they're not into like all kind of playing in the sandbox. What's your experience bringing these people together under one roof?
Yeah, it's a great question. I said, I am a founder. Remember, I started an advertising agency. I was everything you just said, right? I listened to other people's ideas, but I probably thought mine was the right idea at the time, over 20 years, right? So now we're on the opposite side. And I think for us, this was one of the key learnings, is that we had to really understand a founder isn't just a founder. And so the way we look at the lens of the world is there's three very specific types of founders, right? One is a transactional founder, which is, I want to do the deal. I want to get our money. And for whatever reason, some are health, some are life, some are time. If the minute I get my money, I'm happy to walk away, right? The second is a transitional founder, which typically they care a lot about three C's. They care about their culture, they care about their customers, and they care about the community the business operates in. So if it's a berry-based business, they care about it a lot. And they have a timeline. I want to be out in 3 to 5 years. I probably have 1 or 2 sacred cows that I'm like, let's just make sure we can agree on that. But for the most part, I want to transition out of the business. I trust you. We're going to work on it together and let's go build it. And then the last founder is a transformative one, which is I have 5 years left or 3 years left. I've had all these ideas. I didn't get to them, or I wasn't capable of doing these ideas, and whether that was acquiring customers or launching new services. And so for us, typically, we work with deals with transformative founders on the one side, or transitional founders. We don't do a lot of transactional deals because it doesn't work as well for us on the value creation side, and it doesn't have as much alignment as we need to do some of the things we're trying to do. And by the way, there's not a right or wrong answer in there of what founder is better or worse. It's just, what we help founders identify is which one actually are you?
Which one were you at Traffic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the honest answer is I think I was stuck between two, which made my deal a little bit complicated, which I've learned and I share all the time, which was I wanted a transactional deal because I wanted the business to be valued and I didn't want a complicated deal. But at the end of the day, we ended up being a transformational one. They took our business and bolted it on. We ended up being a global business. I ended up running a global business. I was super excited about it. I learned so much from it from that standpoint. But I don't think I was clear going into it. I think if I was clear going into it, I would have done a much better deal for myself, probably a much better deal for the private equity business, because we would have had way more alignment than just doing a deal.
Walk me through that, because I think if I survey, and we have surveyed our listeners and users of Value Builder, and what we hear is like, what's your highest priority? It's always maximizing value, right? So they would fit into your transactional bucket the way you've defined it, right? It's like, I want the highest possible price. Some of them are a little bit more transitional. They're focused on the continuity and their employees. But I think most people come at this conversation around exit is like, what is the maximum price I can get for my business? It sounds like, from your perspective, given everything you've seen, that might be a mistake. Maybe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say a mistake. I think we've taken some learnings and we've made some mistakes. And I wish I could tell you that every deal was perfect, and I wish I could tell you that I did every deal exceptionally. We didn't. We had to learn, and sometimes those learnings are painful on all fronts. A couple of things that I think are key. One is we typically look at businesses in the safety space because of the revenue size. They're sort of in that lower mid-market size, right? So you are talking to the founder. The founder has struggled to get the business above a certain threshold, and they want it to get it above a certain threshold. I don't think looking at it as transactional is a mistake. I don't. And I think as long as you understand that's what you're looking for, I think you can do a really clear deal, right? And I think what we spend a lot of time with founders, even years in advance that we ever do a deal, is which one are you? And therefore, how do we make sure that we do something that works for you, right? And sometimes the interesting part is, and some of it is our flexibility in deal structure, because we don't have a fund and a bunch of other things, is, you'll meet with a company and there'll be 3 founders or 4 founders, and they're never the same. Like, you don't have 3 transactional guys very often, is the honest answer, for a bunch of reasons. And so we're able to customize the deals. What I would say is why it's important, I think, to know who or what one of those 3 types or archetypes you are, is you can just do a better deal. You can just do a better deal. And as you've been on this way longer than me, is, everyone talks about the multiple. To me, the multiple is just getting us on the same playing field, really, right? Like, let's just get to a multiple that is enterprise value. And then once we can understand what type of founder you are and what are the real objectives in it, whether it's deal structure or deal alignment or how we do the deal or when we do the deal or how the deal evolves, I think it just has way more ability to do the right deal for the right founder.
I'd love to walk through each of those three types of sellers: transactional, transitional, and transformative. And I'd love for you to just describe the basic contours of a deal structure, like what it would look like. Let's just assume it's a $5 million revenue business with $1 million of EBITDA. And we've got three different founders. One's transactional, one's transitional, and one's transformational. Before I get you to answer that question, though, I do think it's important that we define a private investment company, as you are a capital, and how that's different than what people may have heard of, which is a private equity group. Just draw the distinction between private equity and what you guys do.
Yeah, we would be closer to a family office. We're not a family office, which is, we've invested our own capital. We haven't raised a fund and we haven't put term on the capital by any means. And part of the reason is my partners and I look at it like, if you have a great business and it's a great business, why would you ever sell a great business at our stage of life, right? Because we've sort of been through different phases of it from those things. Like, great businesses are great businesses. And so we don't have the pressure to flip a business in 5 years or 7 years, whatever it is, to return capital. That, I think, is probably the greatest differentiation on the front end. So it allows us to do things very differently. And then I think on the last end, which is, we're operators, right? Like, so for the most part, I came from operations. I love operating businesses. We understand operating businesses. And so we're very operationally bent, which doesn't mean private equity is not. It's just, it is a big driver of how we do value creation, is we're willing to get in because we've been in before in those types of businesses. So I think those are the two big drivers. One is, because of the way we put the capital structure together, we don't have term. And so we don't have the pressure that it's got to be successful in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with those models. I want to be super clear. And those models have been very well for a bunch of people and made a lot of good businesses great, right? I think it's just a choice, right? So that's the first one, and which is probably allows us the flexibility to look at founders a little bit differently.
And you refer to it on your website as permanent equity or permanent capital, I believe. Permanent.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not sure anything's permanent. And as I would say, people always say to me, hey, would you sell the business? And the answer is maybe. We've said before, if somebody can run the vision of us getting people home safe across the country as good or better than us, but can actually make it bigger and more scalable, we'd be more than happy to talk investment partnership or any of those things. But we don't have an end goal in it except to build a great business. And I think that's why we use the word permanent. And we probably need a better word, right? Is the honest answer. But I think if you go into making decisions with a permanency view on it, we just believe in a service-based business for sure. Typically, those are more value creation aligned decisions. And that's the reason we do it.
Okay, so let's go back to my hypothetical $5 million service company revenue, $1 million of EBITDA. And I'd love to just hear the general contours of a deal multiple, like what you would think about in terms of value, obviously a range, and then sort of how that structure would be, like 100% cash at closing, or equity rule, or earn out, or like how you'd structure it. So let's go to the transactional guy. Mark, I'm 58 years old. I built this business. I don't give a whatever happens to it after the fact. I just want my money. How do you structure that deal?
So typically let's call it the enterprise value goalposts or multiples are pretty standard in the industry. So it'll be between 3 and 5 times. And I'm just making these up for whatever, right? So typically a transactional founder will be on the lower side of the multiple, would have a higher amount of cash up front, and then typically would have some sort of VTB or structure in place
Define
to
VTB.
At least like a vendor take back. So in other words, they would have, or payment over term. Like there would be some sort of term associated with it, but it'd be a very clean structured deal, which is, hey, we need to transition. It's going to take a year or 6 months or whatever it is. Typically lower end of the multiple, typical, structure with some sort of vendor term. Let's just use that.
And that would
Super
be
clean.
the vendor take back component would be a quarter of the value, half the value. Like what?
Yeah, no, I guess it depends on the size of the business, but typically, if they were all the same businesses, yeah, somewhere in that range, right? Somewhere between 25 to 33% of the deal.
Got it. Okay. So it might be like, look, we're going to value your business as a kind of walk away entity, let you go off to the beach at sort of 3 to 4 million. If they had $1 million of EBITDA, you might get 2/3 of that up front, and then a third we're going to pay you over time.
Yeah, something like that. And the way we look at those deals are, because of the transactional nature, they just need to be super clean deals.
Yeah.
Right. Super clean deals.
And do you write a personal guarantee, or and Capital write a guarantee on the third that they take over time? Like, what's their sort of recourse if that doesn't get paid?
Yeah. So to be fair, most of our acquisitions have been in one space right now. That doesn't mean we haven't looked at others and haven't structured them. So I would say for the most part, that doesn't become a big part of our world today. Is, where's the guarantee come from? For us, just based on our value creation business model, to buy a one-off business that is at that size we're probably not your best buyer.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we can't be, but we're probably not from that standpoint.
Okay. So let's go to transitional. I got a 2 or 3 year runway here, Mark. I want to make sure a soft landing for all my people and the culture doesn't get blown up, but I do want out. Like by the time I'm 60, 61, I want out. So you got me for 3 years. How does that deal look?
Yeah. And typically it looks similar, but we just have more alignment on it. And so it also depends on the founder, right? Some founders want to know clearly, yes, I'm in a transitional, but I want to know that there is a price, and I want to know where that price is. Even if it's 3 years, I'll take payments over 3 years or 4 years. So typically get a bit more term because the founders want to still be associated with it. And we have multiple tools, right? One of them is we have something called a partner accelerator incentive, which acts like rolled equity, looks like rolled equity, performs like rolled equity, but the founder still has a very clean deal. Right. And so that's the way we sort of handle those types of things, which is, hey, we want you to stick around. We want you to feel like a partner. And yet you have a term to the deal you want us to sign, and you don't want that to be an open-ended term, which I totally understand. And so that's how we've got super creative with some tools to do some really, I would say great deals with amazing partners who are like, I don't want to leave today, but I need clarity for my family. I would love the upside to run with you hard, but I'm only going to run for 3 to 5 years or whatever it is. And that's how we structure it. So that would be the way. And, the tool we use for most of those is a partner accelerator incentive, which really has alignment as partnership.
So partner accelerator, it's sort of like a phantom equity plan, or how would you describe it to?
Well, yes, I always joke and say disclaimer, no CRA advice or, accounting advice from that standpoint. But yeah, we want to treat people and have people be aligned as partners. The fact that, they don't get their last transactional check for 3 to 4 years, they're still our partners in the business because they bought into the vision and all that. So yeah, it would, for clarity, it would act and feel very much like that. But act and feel from a legal standpoint is really the smallest part of the battle. It's how do you act and feel that way as partners behaviorally day to day is really what I think we're working on being very good at. I would say we're not perfect every day, but we're working to be very good at it every day.
And then last bucket, I've got $5 million in revenue, $1 million in profit, and man, I see a huge opportunity in front of me. I just don't have the expertise and the capital to make it happen.
Yeah, so typically, you can imagine that it'd be potentially on the higher end of the multiple from that standpoint. They would have a bigger role in it, and the role would either be to keep equity in their current business or have some equity in their business be able to be convertible into the master business over time. So we're totally aligned. Like there's 100% alignment on the growth of the business. And we run together and work together. From a capital standpoint, we would still put the systems in place and we would still do some of the capital allocation, but that person would still be writing a check in the business if we're doing a big capital investment because they're still a partner in the business from that standpoint. And so all 3 of those, I would tell you we've done. I would tell you there isn't a more successful or less successful model. I would say the more successful models are when the founder you're working with can have these conversations and we can ask them all the questions, and then they can go home and talk to their family and say, oh my God, I didn't really think I was actually this, but I didn't know I was that. Or, hey, I still need this clarity and I need structure, but I I don't want to walk out the door tomorrow, and I still can add value to the business. But I would love to not have to do it all together or all alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to know how entrepreneurs react. I mean, I'm assuming you lay these three types of founders out in a conversation, initial conversation with an owner.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And do they, I'm imagining they try to game you a little bit. They say, oh yeah, I'm happy to stay on forever. I think this is great. I think huge opportunity ahead. Like, do they fake it? Do they kind of try to spin you up a bit?
I would say no, typically, right? Because typically in our world, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but typically we have longer conversations with them. We try and drive the alignment to them. And, we ask some good questions. And I think the fact that I'm a pretty open, transparent guy, I know each other for a while. You ask me a question, I'll answer the question, good, bad, or ugly. I made a lot of mistakes, right? And I made mistakes as a founder. I left money on the table. I probably didn't value the business properly and all of these things. And I had a good tax and deal structure, but it wasn't perfect, right? My deal, I think it was somewhere around, I can't remember the math. People ask me, it's somewhere between like 86 and 92% of my deal, but the other money's vaporized now. And so I didn't do a good job at some things. That's the first piece. And the second one, I'd say, I wish I could tell you every deal we did in the last 2.5 years was a great deal. And some of them structurally were great deals, but we didn't have that piece we just talked about, which is where was the founder at and how do we have the incentives aligned? And we made some mistakes, and I'm very open about those mistakes. And I wish I could go back in time, and I wish I could structure some deals differently, or I wish I could have asked some different questions.
I mean, names aside, maybe walk me through one of the mistakes and what you learned from it.
Yeah, we bought a small business, and it was sort of under $1 million in revenue, and it was very family run. And by the way, the founder today is an amazing guy, still does work with us today. But, we did a deal that should be transitional, but the business was just too small. And in order to transition the business, we had to make some changes on people. And the good news is some of the family members that were involved got into some other things. We treated them very fairly, but it was an unnecessary pain for a business that we should have realized should have been a transactional deal. It was too small a deal. The founder, once again, is an amazing guy. He works for us, and his ideas were big and all those things, but it just wasn't big enough for us to go build a foundation of transformation around. It was truly a transactional deal. On some of the other sides, our original deal, which I will take responsibility for, I don't think we had full alignment on, was it a transactional deal or was it a transformational deal? And to be fair, we were excited about the business and we got the deal done, and it was structurally an amazingly good deal for us as an acquirer. Structurally, it was a good deal for the seller. It wasn't intentional that it was supposed to be a good or whatever deal. But I don't think we had alignment on which one was actually the founder. And I think we were probably a bit naive and probably didn't spend enough time asking the right questions, which was one of the mistakes we learned. And I think we've got better as we've gone in having conversations with founders to really ask, into the tough questions, because that sounds like we're trying to catch somebody. We're not. If anything, it's actually the opposite. It's like, if I can ask you the questions that when you're driving in your car, you're suddenly like, oh my God, I'm totally that type of founder. Therefore, we can get to a better structure. And I don't think it's an easy thing though. And it's not, for the most part, to your point, you had a good question, which is, do they kind of bluff? I would say no, but I would also tell you the first answer usually isn't the royal answer. It usually is one of those things that has to percolate for a while and be lots of conversations for people.
What are your favorite questions to draw it out?
Yeah, like I would ask, if you had the money today, what would you go do with it?
Okay. And what's the right answer to that? What's the wrong answer?
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but if the people are like, well, I wouldn't do anything with it, then you're like, okay, well, then what are you going to do next Wednesday if you had all the money? And they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I don't golf very much. I don't play tennis. I'm super passionate about it. And you start to realize that, they do want an exit, but they do want it to be a transitional exit, right? Because they don't know what they're going to do the next day. They still have a lot of energy towards the business. And it's not like there's a financial structure or stress that they need tomorrow. And so that's a good way when you sort of navigate those conversations to realize it's a great transitional founder, right? He's still passionate about the business, doesn't want to do all the work necessarily, would love to see part of it, and doesn't have an urgent thing that has to be tomorrow's dollar from that standpoint.
Got it. Okay. And then what are the range of questions that you get? Do you get people that say, well, I'm going to buy a yacht and I'm going to go buy a cabin and I'm going to do they give you that sort of answer?
Yeah, I would say, look, we work in an industry that I would say it's safety. There's a bunch of conservative people in safety. So most people in safety, at least, are not going to buy a yacht as their first thing. But we invested with a great transitional founder and his wife out of Barrie. They had some very clear life priorities. But that deal was super clear. They were like, hey, we don't want you to move the business out of Barrie. We super care about the people. We want to know you're going to come work in the business and listen and learn for the first year. And then, we'll transition out after about 2 years. And I would say that's one that worked extremely well because we had total alignment. And after a year, they came to us and said, hey, look, we're actually ready. We trust that you're going to do it. We know every employee may not be here a year from now as you try and make the business better every day, but we trust that your values and what you committed to are all checking the boxes. And so that's a great success story. And they've been traveling the world. I joke all the time. Randy's the founder and Kathy's his wife. And I always joke and say, where's the next trip to, Randy? And they're traveling the world and having fun with their family, which is amazing.
Okay, so one of your favorite go-to questions is like, if you had the money, what would you do with it? And so you're asking that, as I understand it, because if they say, well, I don't know what I do with it, I like nothing. I don't have it. That suggests to you that they're not necessarily a transactional buyer. They don't necessarily Correct. Just have some, whereas if they gave you a list of things that they wanted to go buy and go do, you'd probably assume they were more transactional than transitional. Am I getting that, interpreting that correctly?
That's totally part of it, right? The other one is if your biggest competitor offered you the same amount of money, would you take it? And that's when you really realize how passionate they are about their business and their people. Because some of them are like, there's not a chance I'm selling to that person. And here's the 3 reasons why. And you're like, okay, well, great. Then you still care about the business and the trajectory and all of these things. And we can probably structure a better deal. On the transformative side, in some ways, those become the easiest. I think getting the right structured deal for transformative founders, sometimes it takes more time. It's not that they're more complicated. It just takes more time because you ask them, hey, if you had an unlimited amount of money, what would you do for your business? Who would you buy? What would you launch? What are the things about your business that you wish you could fix? What have your customers asked you to do that you've never been able to do on your own? And it's almost like a brainstorming session lunch. You don't even get to the food and the plate because they have 17 ideas that get excited. And it's not just they have ideas. They get passionate about the ideas, right? They're energized by the ideas. And so typically sometimes I got to say to those founders, hey, you told me you're transactional, but at the end of the day, what if we could go do this and structure a deal? Would you be more interested? And they're like, 100% I'd be more interested. And usually they come with some sort of parameters and scope, which we think are great, which is, hey, I don't want to work 80 hours a week anymore. Part of the deal has to be I can pull stuff back. Part of the deal has to be you take, these 5 pieces of operations and finance day one. And that's our model anyway. So the reality is, what I say to founders is if we can do it as good or better than you, we should take it day one. And some of those things, as are finance and banking and insurance and all those types of things.
Yeah, for sure. So again, the question is like, if your competitor came in and offered the same amount of money, would you take it? And if the guy says yes, transactional. If he says no way, and here's why, probably transitional or
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Nice. And then if you can't shut him up because he's going on about the 16 different product lines he wants to launch, you're probably talking about somebody who wants to be transformational.
Yeah. And once again, it doesn't mean it's not like we have a template and it's not like we're experts at this.
Yeah.
To be fair, we've been going at it for 3 years. We are, founder led or founder empathetic or founder understanding because we are founders. Like that's how we got here. And so I think that we understand what it's like to be sitting on the other side of the table. And once again, we don't get every deal done. We try, to be fair. And some are because just somebody either offers a higher price. And at the end of the day, somebody says, hey, look, yes, I'm this type of founder, but that's just way too good to be true. And we're going to take that offer and I'll deal with the consequences or I'll deal with the output. And I fully respect that. Like at the end of the day, I have so much admiration for founders that have built businesses, especially, harder businesses that are so required, or that's putting the HVAC in our schools, or, the safety person who's got to work 80 hours a week because of projects. I've just learned such admiration for these businesses and founders from that standpoint.
Yeah. No, makes total sense. What's the biggest thing you've learned in addition to the 3 types of potential buyers? Like, I'd be curious to know, another way to ask this question would be like, if you rewound the clock by 2.5 years, like what do you wish you'd known then that you now know today?
Yeah, well, probably, and I don't know if you and I talked about this last time. One of my greatest mistakes in learning was probably one of the simplest things I've ever understood. And by the way, like this wasn't a mistake I don't think I made for 2 years. In hindsight, I probably made the mistake for 25 years in my career.
Okay.
And with founders, it's really important, which is you're never going to really get agreement.
Okay.
Right? Because if you're a founder, your way was the way you did it. And if I'm now saying to you, can we agree that we should do it differently, to a founder who's so personal led that basically says, I'm telling you, you did it wrong. Right. And when I say to you, can we agree the number should be not the number that you think it should be, I'm basically challenging them as a founder in what they've built. And I stupidly did it a lot. Right. Which is like, let's agree if we did this, it'll be this. And it became about ego. And it was unwillingly so. And we made a lot of mistakes, and I did. And it wasn't like I thought I was smarter or I thought I had all the answers. It was like I almost, in some bad ways, like pushed the founder to try and say that they didn't build the best business. And it was a big mistake. It created way too much tension. And so what I've learned through that process, and we've learned, is don't focus your energy on agreement. Just focus on alignment, because alignment depersonalizes it. If alignment is, can we align? We want to double the business. Cool. Then let's align to how we think we should go do that. And because when it becomes so personal, it's a business somebody built for 25 years. Like no answer I'm going to give you is a good answer, like zero. And so when I would kept trying to do it, and our objective was the right one. Let's go make this even better business. But we did it in a way that came across at times as so egotistical, not intentional, that we created way too much friction between founders, and it's unnecessary. And now I would also say, I think finding alignment with founders is not an easy thing, honestly. And I think it's a humble thing. And I think it starts with a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity, and a lot of patience. And I think, on our best day, we do it very, very well right now. On our worst day, I probably still piss some founders off every once in a while, but we at least have the trust, because we know that's our objective, that we can have different types of conversations than trying to force agreement on somebody who's run a great business for 20 years.
I love this point. And I don't think we did talk about it last time, because I think I would have remembered it, but it's such a brilliant point, because, and I think my listeners who are about to sell their company should perk their ears up, because, the idea of selling your company, okay, great. You're going to have some sort of transition period during which time the buyer's job description is to make your company more valuable. Therefore, they need to make changes. And those changes are all ultimately things that you decided on. So every time they make any decision, you're going to disagree with it. So
exactly.
That's, this is how our website should look. No, this is how our website should look. Like, no matter what they bring to the table in terms of building value of the company, it's going to be something you disagree with. How are you going to deal with that?
And the disagreement is a snowball. Like, it's not a single thing. Once you disagree, disagreement's a snowball, because it becomes personal. And once again, take my mistakes as learnings, but and at the same time, working towards alignment takes energy and time and focus, and you got to have good conversations, and you've got to work as an investor, and you've got to work as a founder to make sure you can find that middle zone. But I would tell any founder, you're going to get zero agreement after you sell your business. Like, so if you just manage your expectations to zero agreement, and if you can depersonalize the decisions to make them about alignment on the business, you'll be in a way better place. And by the way, you'll be 100 times happier than going home every night being pissed off that somebody's trying to change what you built versus trying to make what you built better. And I think that those are the two tensions, right?
I can imagine this being hard on lots of levels. One, let me start by paying you a compliment. We've known each other for some time, and one of the things I've always appreciated about you is your radical candor, right? Like, if you don't know the answer, you will just come out and say, like, in a self-deprecating way, I made this mistake. I could have done this differently, or I should have done this. And that takes a tremendous amount of confidence, not cockiness, but confidence. Like, hey, like I'm willing to be transparent with you. And I can imagine it being really hard for a founder who maybe lacks that same degree of confidence to be as forthcoming and willing to fess up to their mistakes or shortcomings, because they see you rocking in there, and I can imagine them going, "Oh, I wish I was like Mark. I wish I could, be so transparent." But like, no, I disagree, because I don't have the confidence to be so self-deprecating. Does that make any sense at all?
I think it does, right? And I think you and I talked about this before, but good or bad or ugly, I've had some stuff in my life, right? Like I've told your listeners before, like my father made a mistake. He robbed a bank, and I carried that around as this massive thing for a long period of time. And then finally, I think it was 2021 or 22, I decided to go on a friend of yours of mine, I think Tony Chapman's podcast, and I talked about it openly for the first time. And then I didn't really think, by the way, it was going to come up in every business transaction I did, just for the record. Like, you talk about making a mistake. I'm glad I did it. It was the greatest gift ever, but it was now out there, right? So in some ways, as I taught to founders, I'm like, well, like I'm standing here naked in front of you. You can go find all this out about me. And so I think that has helped on some and is humanized us trying to do something that at times doesn't feel very human when you're trying to acquire somebody's company or invest in somebody's company. I think, that has at least given me a foundation that people can build off of. But I think the other one is I try and talk about this openly, right? Which is, you're not going to agree with everything. And I'm not going to agree that we can keep everything the same way. But if we both work really hard to focus on what alignment can look like, and by the way, our whole team works on this from that standpoint, then we'll just be in a better place. Because when we're not in a better place, we can talk about it. Right. And I think that's the other thing that we've realized is trying to get to those open conversations and be somewhat of a great listener makes the business better, because it usually makes the partnership better.
Some people listening will hear you use the term alignment and agreement and say, but Mark, those are like synonyms. Like, what's the difference? In your world, there is a clear delineation. They are different. But for someone who's saying, those are just synonyms saying the same thing in a different way, what would you say?
Yeah, I would give them my at least understanding of it, because which is it in most of human interactions, in my humble opinion, if you're trying to get agreement typically comes across as somebody has an opinion or an idea that is not yours or needs to be different. And in something that is so personalized, like a business that a founder took a mortgage out and blood, sweat, and tears and had to make payroll and had to go through cycles, hearing what you built was wrong is like dynamite. Right. And you can't help but do it, because this is the other interesting thing about our founders is we all find the problems in the business to keep the business running for the next day. Right. Like I've met many founders who talk to me, and I wasn't one. It was like, oh my God, everything's great. We're killing it. They're like, I need to fix HR and I need to fix this and I need to fix this. And so agreement is sometimes like putting a flashlight on all of those things. And it's very personal. Alignment is focusing on outcomes, not issues, right? If agreement is issues based, alignment is outcome based. And you can get way more alignment on, do we want to double the business? Yes. Okay, let's work backwards on how we double the business if that's the outcome we're trying to achieve.
I love that. And again, my listeners are coming to our conversation with one of two lenses on. One, a surprising number of them actually want to buy a business. That can be a tuck-in business to make their existing business more valuable, larger. Others, they're kind of one step out the door with their existing business. And when they're thinking about like, what am I going to go do? It's not go to the golf course. It's I want to go buy a business. And they may even have one in mind. So they're listening to you comment from that perspective. The other perspective I think is really cool is that, they're going to sit across the negotiating table from someone like you, right? And their job is to say, could I work with this guy, right? Like, is this someone I could get alignment with? And so just hearing how you think about the difference between alignment and agreement, I think is really interesting for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes as a founder, this, right? If you know that that's where you want to go, you're going to also surround yourself with people potentially in some sort of the deal that can help you stay focused on it's personal, but don't take every comment as personal. Selling your business is the most personal thing probably besides marriage in your entire life, right? Like marriage and having kids and selling your business are probably the top three things in your life. So it is personal. So nobody should tell you it's not personal. And by anything I'm saying, I'm not saying it's not personal. You should make it personal and you should be personally excited about it and all of those things. And at the same time, you should try and find a way to navigate the conversations about the business in a way that is as less personally elevating as possible. It is the way that I would describe it. And I think that that's how we got to, which is alignment is outcome based and agreement seems to be very issues based.
You talk to a lot of founders. You invest in some, but I'm sure many that you pass on or just don't think that you can get a deal done. What are the biggest mistakes you see founders make around this whole conversation around exit selling? What do you see?
Yeah. How about this? I'll give you some shared learnings, right?
Sure.
Because I think a mistake for me may not be a mistake for you and all sorts of things. I think the first one is there's so much energy in the marketplace around the multiple. Mm-hmm. And so much around the multiple. And I'm not minimizing the multiple. I'm not. But there's not enough around deal structure and the type of deal that works for you and how the deal can work better for everyone.
And by deal structure, you mean earnout, equity role? What's your role?
Yeah, and even timing on it, right? You know, in the Canadian marketplace, there's a bunch of tax strategies that need to happen, and you know, the U.S. marketplace, there's different ones, and I think really understanding how you do a very creative deal to everyone, and that's not easy at times because some people have very structured deals, and we have the flexibility that we can do very different types of deals. But I don't think there's enough energy at time focused on the macro deal structure, which is not only to your point, the structure of how much cash do I get up front? And then is it a VTB? Is it like, am I lending money back to the business? Am I taking term? Is it an earnout? Is it convertible equity? Yes. And then the next layer, which is, and then how does that all work out for the best of everyone? Because, you know, as you've heard and we've known, people have left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table because of bad deal structure, not just what's written in a legal paper, but well thought through deal structure of what works for everyone.
And this comes back to your own personal learning and traffic. I think you said earlier, and I want to make sure my listeners heard 86 to 92% of.
Yeah, it was something around that. Yeah.
Meaning the other 14 to 8%, something like that was, I don't want to say promised to you, but you were expecting, and if for whatever reason, it didn't come to fruition.
Yeah. Well, I rolled, right? Like I took a bunch of our capital and, you know, I rolled and we ended up rolling about double the amount that we originally rolled because we got excited about it. And to be fair, like it's nothing that the seller, the buyer did wrong. You know, Onyx was buying our business. I didn't read the fine print. No, and honestly, and that's what I'm saying. So the deal structure was not as liquid as I thought, as if I was going to leave at a certain point or what they were going to do with the business. And I was naive about it. It was nobody else's fault but my own, right? Because the macro deal structure was pretty simple. How much I got here, how much I got year one, how much I got year two, how much I got year three. And for the most part, that was structured pretty well tax-wise. I had great tax advice. It wasn't optimized, but it was done very, very well. But the last piece, you know, wasn't because we didn't even talk about that piece. My bad. We didn't talk about it.
Yeah. And as I recall from our last conversation, it related to the dilution of those shares when new people came in. Was that the essence?
Well, no, what happened, well, sort of. What happened was that, you know, if they needed to sell the business, whatever they sold the business at was what the reset stock price was. And as the business had debt load and a bunch of other things, which by the way, I could have read all of this and had a better sense of it. The business just didn't have the value it did. And so at the end of the day, when Onyx made the decision that it was, you know, it wasn't a fit for their portfolio, I wasn't part of it at the time. You know, there was a big downswing in the value of the business based on a bunch of things that had to be corrected.
And isn't it their job to kind of point that out to you and explain those terms in simplistic layperson terms for a non-deal person? Like, is that like, do you kind of blame your lawyer for not kind of being super clear with you about what you were signing?
I think a lawyer is only as good as the questions you ask him. Right. And I think or at least the structure or at least clarity of what you need for you and your family. The answer could be yes. To be fair, I was selling to Onyx. I got caught in the Hollywood lights, right? Like we probably should have done it differently. They did nothing wrong. Like, to be fair, they said, here, you can have whatever you want and all those types of things. And, you know, I was naive because I also hadn't sold a business before. It was a good business transaction for us. I'm super happy with it. And it was great for my family. Could it have been better? 1,000%. Do I wish I would have, run a bit of a different type of process? Probably. I don't think you know that all in hindsight. And do I wish that I would have had a really clear sense on, okay, if I'm believing in the transformation of this business, which was you asked me, I was part transactional and part transformational. I didn't really due diligence the transformational part. And that's the part I probably should have done a bit more due diligence on. Yes.
Interesting. Okay, back to my question earlier. What do business owners and entrepreneurs do wrong or get wrong? They focus myopically on the multiple, and I think we both understand why that is. But I think it was Warren Buffett who says, "I'll buy your business for $1 trillion if I can pay $1 per year for 1 trillion years." I think that was a Buffett phrase.
Yeah, it's great.
But, the other one that M&A guys and gals talk a lot about is you go ahead and set your price, but I'll set the terms. Same kind of adage, but
yeah, absolutely.
It's similar. But fair enough. Entrepreneurs focus on the multiple. The other one I've heard a lot about the multiple is like, I get you want, X multiple, but have you stopped to think about, is that multiple of trailing 12 months, last completed fiscal year, future, present, adjusted, like all of the above have massive swings on the overall, price.
Yeah, it's totally fair, right? I think your point of what number you multiply by what number can change its deal structure significantly, right? Yeah. One of the other things that I would say is a learning, which I wouldn't argue necessarily as a mistake, is people really getting a good sense of what is the normalization of your P&L or simpler income statement is, right? And so I think that that's one that founders, should at least understand. And I'm not saying that, I'm sure that, people buy businesses out there because people don't normalize them properly. And I'm sure on the other side, people try and over normalize businesses that they can't even operate with that sort of structure as it goes forward. But I would say the normalization is a good learning. And, the one that you and I always know is working capital, right? I think working capital is always one that especially in transactions that are not, massive transactions, working capital on a service-based business is always a, conversation that requires a bunch of listening and will be one of the more uncomfortable conversations, but the business requires it, right? Like the business cannot operate on a zero balance the day it's bought because the business runs on a certain balance, especially as a service-based business. And so that would be one of those that I would say to founders, be prepared to have a really open conversation about it, but understand the same way that you leave working capital in your business for the most part on a monthly and weekly basis, the business has got to have that when an acquirer has it, because part of the value in the business is it can run with the working capital day one.
I want to make sure my listeners understand those two terms because a little bit inside baseball for some. So the normalization process is expressing your profit and loss in such a way that the acquirer would achieve a profit and loss under their kind of ownership. So if you have some unusual personal expenses that you're running through the company, for example, you'd probably pull those out of your normalized.
That was very well articulated. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Likewise, there may be things that the acquirer would need to put in your P&L to operate it because they would need to buy something or hire somebody to replace somebody. There's a whole give and take that goes on. Am I getting that roughly?
Yeah,
right?
I think you explained it great, which is, as founders and entrepreneurs, there's ways that the business is run that as you're trying to run it differently, let's not say more professionalized, whatever, you just have to run it differently. And so some of those things would have to be additive to the business and the P&L, which may have a negative effect on it. And some of those things can come out of the business. And that would have an accretive part to the seller. And I think that just understanding clearly what those are is one of the things that we encourage people to get a sense of. Because,
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Because once again, we would never do a deal where somebody felt like we weren't trying to explain all the things that they should know before they do a deal. Because that's just setting everyone up to fail.
Yeah. And what's the craziest thing you've seen someone try to add back into a P&L or take out?
Yeah, well, headcount is always the one to take out, right? Because usually in most of these businesses, it's the most expensive one of, we don't need this person or we don't need this person. And some are because they're family members and the family members want to exit with the business, but you're like, well, that person's the general manager of the business. How are we going to operate without a general manager or a head of sales or whatever it is? So people are typically the one from that standpoint. And then, the other one would be And I understand why, but sometimes as founders and sellers, when you know you want to sell, you're trying to prime the business's P&L to look as good as it possibly can. And at times, and this isn't like a tricky thing that's manipulative, it's just the way you do it. You build your business to look as big as you can, is you sometimes hold back on capital expenditures or stuff that actually need to be invested in the business to run it. And, you don't want a buyer to feel like you didn't keep the business running to the best of its possible ability. So the day one that they've invested in or own it, they've got to strike a massive check just to keep the lights on or keep your fleet going or keep your manufacturing running. That's not going to work out well at the end of the day.
Right. Like your website's held together with duct tape and you're just
Correct.
trying to get it to the last mile to get the transaction done. And then that new buyer has to go totally redevelop your website because it's
Correct.
got all kinds of technical debt, for example.
That's not a good way to start a relationship from that standpoint, unless everyone knew about it, right? Which is some of that alignment piece, right? So I look at alignment as probably one of when you look at these, and these aren't minor pieces, as you know, it can fluctuate the deal up and down, but getting into these of, okay, does the website need to be redesigned? Well, we think it does. You think it doesn't. Here's the reason we think it does. And then is that part of the deal? Is that part of our value we bring to the business? Whatever it is. And I think just having those conversations helps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you refer to working capital. And I think, again, for my listeners, that may be a terminology. I've referred to it as a second most important number on any sort of term sheet or offer to buy your business, because you get the headline number, you get excited about that, lots of zeros. And then there's usually a formula for calculating working capital. And that's effectively the amount of money you have to kind of leave in the business is a simple way to think about it when you hand over the keys. You don't get to scrape all of your cash out of the bank account before you hand over the keys. Am I getting that roughly?
Yeah. And once again, I'm not the CFO or accountant, but it's just that, I sort of look at it as like the basic amount of money you need to leave in the business so the business runs the same way it did the day before you sold the business, the day after you sold the business, and for whatever duration of time that business needs a runway to be successful. And to your point, it's a negotiated point, but there is an equation, there is a macro structure for the most part. And as long as that structure is clear, and along the founder, and we don't get it perfect every time. So you just got to be able to go back and forth with the founders to get it sort of how it is. But those would be the three big things. And then the only last one I would say is, in hindsight, I was fortunate that the people I sold the business to gave me some pretty cool and sexy stuff to go do for about 18 to 24 months. God bless my family. I was on planes a lot. But it was pretty cool stuff, right? Like it wasn't shitty, crappy work I had to go do from that standpoint. But if you're a founder who's unclear or a bit apprehensive, one of the things I would try and do is write on a piece of paper the things that you are excited to do in this new world and the things that you want to be very clear that you're going to try not to do in this new world. And it doesn't have to be like a sophisticated document, but at least getting them on a piece of paper will make the partnership way better. Because talking about those things after you've done a deal is never a good idea. Because you want to talk about disagreement. That's really where it's going to happen. And so I would highly encourage founders outside of the financial piece to think about, okay, what does my role look like? What are the things I want to stop doing? What are the things I want to continue doing? What are the things you said you were going to do? And just getting that even to some sort of, whether it's operational document or alignment document, whatever it is, I think would save the founders and the buyers and the sellers just a ton of undue stress that is unnecessary.
That's such great advice. And from what I've heard you say today, none of it's a deal breaker. Like what's important, what can be a deal breaker is if it comes up after the fact. If you said A during the negotiation, in actual fact, you meant B downstream. That's where you start to run into misalignment. But if you're clear up front, it sounds like given your three transaction types, you can kind of work with any of the answers but you just need to kind of understand what their plan is.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this happened, but if a founder has in their head they're going to take 12 weeks vacation, you work through a deal and they're going to get some sort of employment agreement, and the employment agreement says 4 weeks. Sometimes founders are like, yeah, 4 weeks doesn't really matter. Like I'll just take time off when I want. And that's not them being negative. It's just the way they've run their business. For whenever they could take time, they took time. Well, that would be a problem, right? Especially if you just did a deal and you're like, hold on a minute now. So that's a minor example, but I would just say from a founder standpoint, the clearer you can be on the things that you believe you're signing up for and the things you believe you're not signing up for anymore, it just starts a way better alignment and conversation as partners. And to your point, you're not going to see eye to eye on every one of them, but it's way better as you're working through stuff sort of, and typically that's near the end of we've got all the big stuff out of the way. Let's just have this conversation.
What a treat.
At least from our perspective. I'm not saying every investment company sees it that way. Some are like, well, no, that's not the way it works. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. But from our standpoint, the way we do deals and in the long-term view we have, that just seems to work better.
It's a real treat for me to have you back, Mark, because it's fun to capture lessons learned. I mean, you've been, again, as on brand as you always are, candid with sort of what you've learned. And I think that's super helpful for people both selling and maybe one day buying a business. So I appreciate you coming back.
Yeah, listen, as always, I love the conversations with you. And we have such a rich entrepreneurial community. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about, and I think the definition of that is changing a little bit in our economy, right? Which is, you don't have to be a starter to be an entrepreneur, right? And I think that what I get excited about is, your listeners and your radio shows are not only on one side of that equation, but there's going to be people that are going to buy, then build, which is a whole new spirit of entrepreneurship that I think we need to really double down on in Canada.
I love it. I love it. For folks who want to reach out to you on social, is LinkedIn the best place to do that?
LinkedIn is typically the best for us. And typically I will take them off LinkedIn as fast as I can and just, you can communicate directly with me. But for sure, let me know if we can ever chat or if anyone else wants a perspective. And John, we appreciate what you do. Founders and entrepreneurs in this country need more voices like yours.
Oh, you're very kind. All right. We'll put Mark's contact information, his LinkedIn profile in the show notes at builttosell.com. Mark, thanks for doing this.
Have a great one.